Hello, this is Herschel McWilliams. This is Live Jazz KC, and this is another fine installment of Convo Improvvo with our host Rob Scheps. Today, we're excited to have a amazing world-class trumpet player, composer, arranger, Mr. Eddie Allen. And I'm excited to hear everything you've got to say and hear stories and listen to your music and all of that. So we appreciate your time very much. And I'm sure everyone watching will also enjoy it, and we certainly look forward to hearing it. One thing real quick, I will say, like I've said every other time, we appreciate you tuning in to these great conversations. We hope to have them cataloged for years to come with all of the greats around the world. We certainly do accept gratuities and donations for the musicians involved in these interviews, as there's been no work for the musicians, and there's been gigs are gone, shows are gone, tours are gone. So anything you could do, certainly appreciated, much appreciated, and doesn't go unnoticed. So again, I'm Herschel McWilliams. Mr. Rob Scheps is hosting with Mr. Eddie Allen, and I'll leave it with you guys.
All right, Herschel, thanks a lot. Live Jazz KC. Hey there, Eddie. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Well, I'm better now that I'm talking to you, man. You know, I'm not. It's not part of my day that deals with foolishness. It's better part of the day. You know.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, man. Well, man, I'm really happy to have you on here. Apologize for some of the reschedulings we had to do. Sometimes some, doctor emergencies, and they want their appointment right in the middle of my Eddie Allen interview. So
No problem.
so anyway, I guess it's kind of like third time is a charm. So thank you for your flexibility and welcome. It's great to have you here, man.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Sure. So Eddie, let me understand. I didn't really realize this till I looked you up. I knew about a lot of the folks that you had played and recorded with, but as far as early days, I didn't realize apparently you're from Wisconsin. Is that right?
Yes, Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay. And I know that you did go to Wisconsin Conservatory. I didn't realize that there was a conservatory in Milwaukee. But can you tell us before that, how old were you and why the trumpet when you started?
Let's see. Well, I loved music as far back as I could remember. Before playing an instrument, I dabbled in singing, and then my first instrument was guitar. And I ended up shifting into trumpet because when I got to junior high school, they needed brass musicians for marching band. And when I tried to, I was determined to join the band, but I really didn't want to switch from guitar. So I told the band director, well, maybe if you could let me put my guitar in an amplifier on the edge of the football field, I could play with the band. And he just looked at me like I was crazy, shook his head and said, no. He said, you got a choice to play tuba, trombone, or trumpet. And I was very little. Arms weren't long enough to play trombone. I was too small to carry the tuba, so I said trumpet. So I picked it up and I was able to produce a sound right away. And he said, yeah, trumpet. Okay.
So that was working for you. Sorry, quick question. Do you realize you trying to join a marching band with electric guitar? Do you remember the scene in, I think it was Take the Money and Run, where Woody Allen tries to play cello seated in a marching band?
Well, see, now I've never seen that movie.
You got to see that, man. I mean, yeah, he's another criminal pervert like so many of our idols now, Kevin Spacey and others who are not being named. But yeah, so Woody's probably guilty too. Michael Jackson's guilty. It's horrible. A lot of pedophiles out there. But anyway, but back when Woody was making great movies, it's a really great comic bit, man. I mean, there's the marching band, with their uniforms and the hi hats and trombones. And he's sitting there playing cello in the middle of it. And of course, they keep moving on without him. He has to keep on getting up and running with his chair and putting it back down and trying to join them. And, it never works. But that's very funny that you were young enough and maybe naive enough that you thought, well, man, why can't you include me? I'll just sit on the side,
Exactly. In my mind, it made perfectly good sense for me to be on the 50-yard line while they're marching through their routine and I'm playing the guitar part.
Okay, but you found that the trumpet, that you had some physical affinity for it right away, and that probably is kind of what chose it for you with the brass choices your band director was giving you, right?
Well, what I didn't tell the band director was that my oldest brother had like a trumpet or cornet at home. And when he wasn't around, I would pick it up and try and get a sound out of it. So I figured out how to produce a sound on it, even though guitar was my instrument. So when the teacher gave me the option, trumpet was the only one that I could connect with. So I said trumpet. I picked it up and got a sound. I never told him that my oldest brother had one, so he just thought I was a natural. But the main reason why I wanted to play in the band then was in Milwaukee, the public school systems were set up that if you played in a school band, you would get weekly lessons.
Okay.
Yeah, and at the time I was playing guitar, I wasn't in school programs, so I wasn't getting any weekly lessons. I was kind of picking it up on my own. So to get the weekly lessons, the learning curve just escalated exponentially, and I started I started gravitating more towards the trumpet and less towards the guitar because I was learning so much more on the trumpet.
Okay, but the trumpet for you came before jazz, right? You were playing trumpet before you discovered it.
Oh yeah. And I always tell people now when I do the clinics that my first introduction to European classical music was actually through the Warner Brother cartoons. So
Oh, okay.
you know,
Oh,
you're watching
like Bugs Bunny with Toscanini and stuff like this.
exactly.
Yeah.
So when I started playing trumpet in junior high, first you take the lessons and then you join concert band. And when I joined concert band, you know, they're playing the music from Warner Brothers. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is real music. So I
Mm-hmm.
started to learn more about European classical music. And in addition to that, being at home, listening to the radio, hearing a lot of R&B and pop. So I'm hearing R&B, pop.
Sure.
My mother loved gospel, so I heard a lot of that. And then in junior high, getting into the concert band, got into European classical music. And when I got to high school, that's when I started to listen more and learn more about jazz.
Okay. Excuse me for a second. Hey, Herschel, I'm having trouble hearing Eddie. There's something with the connection, and I don't know if there's anything we can do about it, but it's a little in and out. And Eddie, I don't know what you can do. Herschel says it's fine on his end. Eddie, are you having a problem hearing me at all?
No, I fine.
Okay, all right. So we'll proceed. We can, if we really have to, we can edit a little something out later.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the question. So basically, you're getting lessons in school. You're learning about the trumpet. You're learning about European classical music before jazz kind of came down your pathway. Would that be accurate?
Uh, yes, sort of, kind of, but not really, because at the
Okay.
same time, I uh, when I got into jazz, kind of in high school, some of that music, I realized, hey, I heard this in Warner Brothers and cartoons and the Flintstones as well. So I was
Huh. Okay.
hearing jazz before there was a label to it.
Gotcha. Well, and actually, I don't know you that well, Eddie, but I feel like you are a musical omnivore and someone who eschews labels and kind of intakes all kinds of styles of music. Would that be correct?
Yes.
I mean, I see that just actually any idiot could see that just from the variety of the bands you lead, much less the diaspora of the things you've done outside of your own projects.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
sure. Well, so it sounds like basically, you know what I tell young cats? I mean, look, it's a pandemic. Ain't nobody working. There's nothing happening. So
Uh-huh.
what I tell the young cats, if they're even thinking about ever working, because I don't know what else to tell them, is versatility is the key. You know, if
Yes,
you're a tenor player and you can play alto, there's some more gigs. If you can play flute and clarinet, there's some more. If
that's
you're
true.
like yourself and you played a bunch on Broadway, you can play soul and gospel, classical, not just jazz. There's some more gigs. If you play flugelhorn, there's some more gigs. So it does seem like in good times and bad, versatility is key. Unless you're the best bass player in Milwaukee and you're working 7 nights a week at the same 2 clubs, then you don't need to be versatile. But all the rest of us, aside from damn bass players, versatility is key, right?
I agree.
Well, so let me ask you a question. So I know that your brother is the great drummer Carl Allen, and my curiosity is who is older, and what was your relationship as musicians, as brothers growing up?
Uh, let's see. Well, I'm laughing because you're asking who's older, and he would hate you for asking that question.
I guess I'm always asking, did one of you in some way mentor the other, or were you real close in age, or
Well, okay, I'm older. Um, I don't I don't know any. I'm hard. I don't want to take any kind of credit. I'm not sure if I could take credit as far as mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, no, I think we both just had uh, a love for music, and I think we listened to a lot of music. We tried different things, and every now and then, even in Milwaukee, we would get a chance to play together.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it was just a love for music in the house, I think.
Okay, well, here's a question. So I played in Chicago a bunch. I know a lot of great musicians there, but
Mhm.
my travels have actually never taken me to Milwaukee. I mean, I always say, kind of just to myself, it's kind of the biggest city in America that I never played in. And
Okay.
so, not knowing much about it, except that there's been a good club, I believe. My question is, was there any kind of jazz scene in Milwaukee when you and Carl were coming up that kind of fed you guys and where you learned a lot?
Oh yeah. Let's see. I think there was a jazz scene. The conservatory that I went to had a lot of musicians who performed around town, and they were excellent musicians. Um, I actually learned more about the history of jazz in Milwaukee after coming to New York and seeing some of the legends here who might have played with Count Basie or Duke Ellington. And I might say, I'm from Milwaukee. They say, oh yeah, I played in Milwaukee a lot, blah 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 blah. And it was like a part of that circuit. I was like, oh,
Okay.
I didn't know that. But uh, then trying to watch TV and learn more about it, finding out that Woody Herman was from Milwaukee,
Oh, okay.
and then and not only Woody Herman, but the great alto saxophonist Bunky Green is from Milwaukee.
Oh, I thought he was from Chicago. Okay.
No,
Good.
he's from Milwaukee. Then he actually came out here.
Uh-huh.
I heard he sat in, played with Charles Mingus, was offered that job and kind of turned it down, came back to Milwaukee, went to school, got his degrees, and then moved to Chicago.
Do you know, I mean, man, as I'm sure you are, a huge Elvin Jones fan and aficionado.
Ooh.
And I found an Elvin record I had never seen before just a few months ago, Time Capsule. It was probably kind of like a more limited pressing in the 70s and then went out of print, became hard to get. But the featured horn player in Elvin's band on that whole record is Bunky Green. And I didn't know that had happened.
Whoa, see, I didn't know that either.
Dig it. And it's on YouTube if you want to check it out later. Elvin Jones Time Capsule with Bunky Green and Bunky's compositions too.
Whoa, I'm going to look that up. I love Bunky's playing.
So I don't know that much about Bunky, but the person who schooled me about him to even be aware of him was Steve Coleman. When I was a kid, Steve was one of my teachers at Banff in Canada. And Steve basically, he was all about Chicago, and he would always talk about Bunky Green being like a huge influence on him. And that's maybe why I thought he was from there. I didn't realize he was originally from Milwaukee before that.
So, oh yeah. And guys told me who some of the guys who I looked up to as my teachers in Milwaukee, they said, yeah, when Bunky was a teenager, he had transcribed bird solos and like was nailing them, and like he was so far ahead of the game back then.
Okay. Well, so the question is, obviously you went to conservatories, you went to three fine music schools. You went to Wisconsin Conservatory in Milwaukee. At some point you went to University of Wisconsin in Green Bay, Cheesehead Central, I guess, and then you had a circuitous route at one of the better jazz schools in the New York area, which folks know, William Patterson University in Wayne, New Jersey. And you were there, I guess, early 80s, but you actually went back and completed a degree there in 2000. So I guess my question is, were you and Carl gigging while in high school, and had you both already decided to be professional musicians while in high school?
I think we both decided that we wanted to be professional musicians. In high school, I was playing mostly in R&B bands, but playing in high school R&B bands, and then maybe around my senior year, I started playing in more jazz big bands.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, but it was like, especially in Milwaukee, I kind of started to feel like playing in those R&B bands was kind of like a dead end.
Were they cover bands, Eddie?
Exactly.
So I mean,
yeah.
what maybe, I don't know, Temptations, Aretha, Sam Cooke. I don't know, what were you playing?
Oh no, we were in an instrumental band, and basically we instrumental band with the members of the band would sing as well. So we were doing more like Kool and the Gang, Ohio Players, Earth, Wind and Fire, and then we would venture past that and play like Chicago, Cold Blood, and and even when we played Chicago, Cold Blood, and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, we would lean towards their instrumental tunes.
Right. Well, question though, I mean, I have to say, it sounds like as Dead Ends go, a cover band that
Mhm.
plays Earth, Wind, and Fire is about as fun as a Dead End is going to be.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
see, but it was the
because that's some incredible music to play.
oh yeah, but the thing that for me that made it feel almost like a dead end was the process. Because at the same time I'm playing in the big bands, I would go to a big band rehearsal. We would pull out the music and we would play through anywhere between 4 to 10 tunes in a rehearsal. And then when you're playing in a cover band, either someone sends out a list of tunes for you to learn, or you meet at the rehearsal and you take turns learning your part. So when you go through that process, you're lucky if you're able to get through 2 or 3 songs in one rehearsal.
Right.
Meanwhile, playing in a big band, I've just played through an entire set.
Right.
And not only
So
that,
the rehearsals with the R&B bands are more frustrating, I guess.
not so much, I won't say it's frustrating, it's just the process.
Yeah.
So each
Okay.
rehearsal had its own process. And another thing, when I first got when I got to high school in the 10th grade, went to high school in the 10th grade, went to West Division. And when I got to West Division in the 10th grade, and they had a marching band, we always managed to do the current R&B tunes. It's like if a song came out on Monday, for the football game on Saturday, we had an arrangement of it.
Mhm.
And the reason we had an arrangement of it was one of the tenor players named Marvin Miller. He was a senior, so I'm in the 10th grade. He's in the 12th grade. He worked at a record store. So if the record came out on a Monday or Tuesday, he would pick it up and he would go home and write a chart for the marching band
Wow.
of whatever
Okay.
that new song was. So for me, being in the 10th grade, prior to that, I'm just thinking, you buy music, you play it. And for me to have somebody 2 grades away from me who can write for marching band, that impressed me. So from that point on, I wanted to learn how to write music. And
Sure. Well,
so,
and Eddie, you've done a lot of writing throughout your career for your own bands, and you've been maybe more active in contributing compositions and arrangements to bands in which you've been a sideman than some of the other musicians. Would you say that's accurate? You always seem to have some music at the ready, or want to contribute, or have things that end up on the records, and so you always seem to be writing and thinking creatively about how you can write for the band you're in, not just playing.
yes, and that came from uh, me being curious about music, and an early lesson that Bobby Watson expressed to me. And he and I,
Okay.
we were playing in a small group. I think it was under Mickey Bass's leadership. And we were just talking one day, and Bobby told me once in the conversation, he said, I said, I remember someone once told me that whenever you go to a recording session, whenever you go anywhere, you should always have one of your charts, because you never know when they're going to need one.
Interesting.
And
Well, now Bobby, as you know, he's one of our great friends that we love in Kansas City. I'm close to him. Herschel knows him. And as a matter of fact, I can't really say it on the air, but we got something cooking with Bobby for later this year.
oh,
Um,
beautiful.
yes. And actually what I was doing the day before the quarantine started last year, right around St. Patrick's Day 2020, was in the studio recording Bobby's music with Bobby. But that was different. That was me reaching out after 30 years of the whole world hearing Bobby's great writing and saying, Bobby, I want you to bring conservation. I want to do the 5-horn chart. Let's record this. So
Wow.
we did that. But Bobby expressed to me that when he was with Art Blakey, there was kind of a void of charts, and it was kind of like, does anybody have anything, or something like that. And
Mhm.
and of course, Bobby is such a great natural writer and a prolific writer either he pulled out some things he already had, or he wrote some stuff quickly, or maybe both. But I know Bobby was ready to contribute as soon as he was asked.
Exactly. And that's the story that he told me as well. And
Mhm.
from that story, whenever I do a session
He
or
brings the
I'm
stuff. Wow.
yeah, I don't tell people I have it because they may not need it. But
Right.
if I've been working on something for that particular setup, then I'll just put one or two charts in my bag and then I don't say anything.
This is very smart, because it's very polite, but the point is sort of like, you don't mention it unless someone says, oh man, we're two shorts chart, two tunes short on this CD, or does anybody have any? At that point, you can just very slickly say, well, yes, I do.
Exactly.
I got
Because
something. So
right.
you don't push it on people, but you've had the opportunity because you're silently, personally prepared.
Exactly. Because you don't want to be aggressive, overbearing, because if you do that, especially at the beginning of a session,
Mhm.
and then they're short, they may choose not to do your music simply because of how you try to push it in the beginning.
Right.
So it's better just to, you're not the leader, let the
Right.
leader be the leader.
Right. But the point is, you're always writing, you love writing, and you always have a few things at the ready for almost any ensemble that you end up being even a sideman with, right?
Oh yeah, and part of that for me is like, I know that's my own personal curiosity. Every
Mm.
group I ever play with, I'm always curious about how the pieces fit together.
By the pieces, you mean the pieces of the music, or the instrumental pieces, the different instruments?
Both.
Okay.
Like, so if you listen to salsa music, and so it's like you have all these instruments, and you can have these same instruments in a jazz band,
Hmm.
but do they fit the same way? So if I take one of my jazz arrangements and give it to a salsa band, is it going to work the same way? It's like, does every instrument have the same function?
Right.
If what hits should go where to make this feel more authentic, or just
Right.
lock in.
Right.
So to satisfy my curiosity, as I'm playing with these groups, and I'll ask the guys next to me, what's going on? How does this work? And when they tell me, then I'll go home and I try to write a piece using
Hmm.
the information they showed me or share with me to see if I understand how it works.
Cool. Well, so let's address just for a second, if we can. I know an area of interest for you that you've recorded and written in. I'm not really very articulate this morning. I don't know what's going on. Low pressure system. Um, but I noticed, of all the great people you played with, and you may not have noticed this, I believe, side of your own things, with all of these cats you play with, Lester, Houston Person, etc. It seems like you made more records with Mongo Santa Maria than almost anybody else. You're on 5 recordings with Mongo. Does that sound right?
Hmm.
You must have done quite a bit with him.
Yeah, and probably one of the reasons why that's the case is I actually played with Mongo in 2 separate times.
Oh, 2 separate stints in
Yeah,
chronological. Okay.
yeah.
Well, with that in mind, I'm going to skip ahead. We're going to go back to the other piece that we had planned. But Herschel, let's go to number 3 for right now, and let's actually hear your Latin Brazilian band, Eddie, which you call Salongo. Can you tell us what that name means?
Well, in the 70s, I think like late 70s, um, Ramsey Lewis did a record called Celongo,
Okay.
and um, he's painted it up and everything. It's a great album, but on the back, I never heard that word before. And on the back, he says that Celongo, I think he said Celongo is a Swahili word, which translate to mean we come together to create something beautiful.
Hmm.
And I said, man, that is so cool. If I ever get a band, I want that to be the name of it.
So
And
it's almost like a Swahili word for community or musical
exactly,
community. Right.
exactly. But it's like, everybody comes together for one purpose, to create something beautiful. It's
Right.
like, so it's like any crap that you're dealing with through your day to day, leave that outside, because when you walk through the door, we just trying to create something beautiful.
Well, you know something, man. I practice Buddhism, and one term that I really like from Buddhism is called Itai Doshin, which means many in body, one in mind. And to me, that's the best definition of a band I've ever heard.
Exactly.
Many
And
in
when you,
body, one in mind, right?
oh
Because
yeah,
I mean, how are you gonna be the Count Basie band if you're not thinking with one mind? You know?
right. Oh yeah. And when you see a band that comes across like that,
hmm
it's like it's amazing.
What do you think of this, Eddie? I'm sure somewhere along your travels you've worked with Gary Bartz, I would imagine.
I've met him before, and I
Yeah.
think if we worked together, it wasn't even like work together. It might have been at a jam session, but we know each other.
Okay. Well, so I think he's one of the very, very greatest living alto players. He's one of my personal favorites, maybe
Yes.
because he plays more like Rollins and Coltrane than he does like other alto players. You know, in other words, I dig Gary because he sounds more like a tenor player than the average alto player.
Okay.
And I mean that with that's a neutral, there's no disparagement, but there's something about Gary's style that as a tenor player, for me, it really appeals in the way that Cannonball makes more sense to me than a lot of alto players. Because once again, he sounds like he's playing a damn tenor, you know?
Right. Oh yeah.
But what I read that Gary once said, I mean, he's a very smart guy. And according to Esiot, he's like a Richard Pryor quality comedian. He's one of the funniest people who ever lived.
Wow.
And I said, really? He said, yeah, you know, try being with Gary like backstage in Europe, and you know, we're all dying and rolling on the floor because he's got jokes. But I read that Gary said this really struck a chord with me, and it's a real bit of wisdom. I think he said in a Downbeat interview, no great innovation was ever made in jazz without a working band.
Mm.
And then you think about
Yeah.
the Duke Band, the Basie Band, Louis Armstrong, Hot Five, Miles Quintet with Wayne and Herbie, Coltrane Quartet, Bill Evans Trio, any of that, bands, not just kind of pickup, you know,
Oh yeah.
or throw togethers.
See, that makes sense. And when you think about it too, when most players talk and they get to that level,
Yeah.
one of the things that they always say is like, okay, we got the music down, now throw the paper away.
Right.
You know, so they want you to be able to get off the paper and really get into the music and what's going on with it.
But of course, for you as a busy arranger, particularly for your own bands where you know who you've got and you have the opportunity and the will to write for them, of course, they've got to learn the stuff on paper before the comfort sets in, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I mean, let's hear an example of that. So let's hear a piece that you wrote for your band. You say Ceylongo is the correct word.
Ceylongo, yes.
Ceylongo. And this is an original piece of yours called Just So You Know. I remember Bruce Williams is on alto. I feel like it was basically like American jazz cats in the horn section and like a Latin rhythm section of some authentic cats who I had not heard of who sound great. And
Right.
maybe you can enlighten us about that after we hear it. But let's hear a little bit of your original composition, Just So You Know, with your band Ceylongo, and then get into that a little more.
Okay.
All right. And we're back. So just so you know, by Eddie Allen, with Se Longo, beautiful, man. It's a like a lot of Latin jazz is kind of a combination of bebop with some rhythmic things coming from, from Brazil or other places, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. And you're right with that particular tune. Um, I wrote that tune when I was with Mongo,
Mhm.
but it's a samba, and Mongo is more Afro-Cuban.
Right.
And during this period, um, the Blue Note was doing double billings. And the majority of the time when they did double billings with Mongo, the band opposite us was Paquito de Rivera.
Mm.
And this was, even though Paquito is from Cuba, it was during a period when he had Sergio Brandao on bass, Claudio Roditi on trumpet,
Right.
and Portinho on drums.
Great band.
And
And didn't Sergio just pass a few weeks ago, I believe? Yeah.
exactly, yeah, I was surprised and sad to hear that. And also Michel Camilo, I don't want to forget him.
Oh
He was
man,
on
that's a
piano.
heavy band.
Yeah, and so they were doing a little bit of everything, but they did a lot of Brazilian, like either samba or the bossa, which kind of like took me in that direction as well. So whenever I wrote a tune that had more of a bossa flavor or a Brazilian flavor, I would put that on the side, say, I'll do that later somewhere.
Well, let me ask you a question. So as somebody basically coming from Milwaukee and being invested in straight ahead modern jazz, what did you learn specifically? I mean, I know it's kind of a misnomer, it's a very broad term, but Latin music. What did you learn particularly in your time with Mongo? I mean, it could be specific conga things or beats or certain kinds of rhythms or tunes, or what did you learn that was new to you before you joined Mongo?
Well, one thing that I learned from Mongo is it was interesting to hear other stories about exceptional leaders.
Mhm.
And it seemed like a lot of them did similar things. So with Mongo, he didn't, like people would say, I remember one story was that like when Count Basie might get a song that somebody brought in that he wasn't really crazy about, he didn't tell the composer, this isn't working for me. He would just tell the band, okay, let's put that in the back of the book.
Mhm.
So as a composer, you kind of feel proud that Basie has one of your tunes in his book.
It might be number 430, but it's in the book.
Exactly. Now he may never play it, but
Right.
he didn't cut you down by
Gotcha.
saying this sucks, this isn't. It's like
Sure.
you felt good that your piece is in the book.
Well, now this is interesting. Let me run this by you. Now, I don't know, in the words of Thelonious Monk, did you hear it? Were you there? No, I wasn't. But I've heard two things about famous writers bringing stuff into Basie. What I heard about Thad was as great as he writes, he would bring his things in, and it was sort of clear to Thad and Basie that it wasn't right for the band because it had, Thad's modern tip. And
Right.
so my guess is that the Thad Jones Mel Lewis band formed primarily because Thad needed a place to play his charts that didn't suit the style of Basie.
See, and that was Ceylongo for me. It's
Okay.
like, yeah, so all the stuff, and I knew I wanted to name a group Ceylongo. At the
Okay.
time, I knew nothing when I fell in love with just that word.
Yes.
I knew nothing about Afro-Cuban music.
Okay.
But when I play with Mongo, and I'm getting into Afro-Cuban music, and then we play in different venues, so I'm learning about Brazilian music as well.
Mhm.
Then that name started to push forward again,
Okay.
and me writing music that was a samba, bossa nova, I knew right away that this wasn't the kind of stuff for Mongo.
Mhm.
So it would have been, it's just like what we were talking about earlier, bringing a chart to a recording session and pulling it out if the leader says we need another chart.
So
So
the piece we just heard, just so you know,
uh-huh,
you're basically saying when you were with Mongo without telling out anybody, you were thinking this isn't quite right for him.
exactly.
It's
And I
it's
knew it.
it's right for something else. I may have to do it myself, but it's not right in this band. So
Exactly.
so the truth is, Eddie, it sounds like you have a rare quality, honestly, in jazz, which is the how can I put it? the ability to think sensitively and critically about what music fits where before you even turn people on to what might be in your bag.
Um, I hope so. Well, that's part of the process that I had mentioned earlier. Whenever I play with a band, I like to try to see how the pieces fit.
Sure.
And one way for me to make sure I understand how the pieces fit is to write something in that style. I may not take it there to be played, but
Right.
I'm just trying to see if I understand this new puzzle.
Okay. Well,
And
go ahead.
and
Sorry.
then once, so if I write a piece and I say, yeah, I think I have it, then I might take it there to have it played. And if the leader chooses not to play it, my feelings aren't hurt, because it was almost like an exercise for me to see if I understand this music.
But then again, you would never take a piece of your own like Frickin' Frack into Mongo's band. You would have to take it somewhere where it was musically and stylistically more appropriate.
Exactly.
Okay.
It-
Now, I
yeah.
guess what I'm saying is that politeness but that unerring sense of taste that you seem to have about what music you could present to which people seems to be that's a beautiful thing. That's great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Well, and along those lines, let me run two more things about writers for big bands by you and get your reaction.
Okay.
Number one, now we know how if Count Basie was on a desert island and could only bring 5 charts, one of them would be Shiny Stockings by Frank Foster. I'm sure of it. This is like A++, top shelf level Basie, aged in oak casks for 180 years, like the most expensive scotch. It doesn't get any better than Shiny Stockings. And I heard a story that the first time Basie's band read that chart down when Frank first wrote it, you know what Basie supposedly said to Frank Foster?
Oh, what?
Yeah, Frank, you really put one down that time. Now, if that's true, I love it. I mean, that's Count Basie, like the king of subtlety, basically saying, yeah, it's killing.
Right. Oh, yeah, exactly.
In his, Julian Priester kind of like, smooth wave way. The other thing I wanted to run by you, and it's interesting because I was on Facebook just last week trying to find the wonderful trumpet player Frank Gordon, and I was going to ask you where he is and what happened to him.
Let's see. Well, he's currently living in Japan.
Really?
Yes,
Okay.
he and his wife are in Japan. He left New York and moved to Savannah first, and then they went from Savannah to Japan.
And let me bring up Frank Gordon for 3 reasons. Number one, he was with Horace Silver for a hot minute and nobody knows it. He was probably most visible as far as I know. I mean, I was a child in the 70s, but I do remember Frank was the main trumpet soloist in the Thad Jones Mel Lewis band for a while because they had a very unusual trumpet section. At that point, they had 3 lead players and only 1 jazz player. You know the band I'm talking about, like live in Munich?
Oh, yeah.
They had Al Porcino, who was the senior kind of lead player, and then the other cats were Earl Gardner and Lynn Nicholson. Incredible lead players, not really jazz players. And Frank Gordon was the only cat out of 4 who played a lot of jazz. But I think between Frank Gordon and Thad Jones, that's plenty of trumpet. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
That's
and
enough.
And it's interesting with that. Now, Frank Gordon is from Milwaukee.
Oh, he is. Okay.
Yes. And Frank did that tour, got that job with Thad and Mel, because before Frank, Cecil Bridgewater had that position.
And he was there quite a bit. And Thad even recorded his music, like I think Love and Harmony and a couple of pieces of Cecil's.
Exactly.
Right.
And right around that time, Cecil, because Cecil and Frank told me this, that Cecil was getting ready to go on tour with Max Roach.
Which he never left. Cecil was with Max for about 20 years or maybe longer, right?
Exactly. And Max was working a lot.
And not only that, not only to play with the great Max Roach, who just is my own shit. I love Max because he's one of the musicians like Frank Foster who didn't stay mired in his time and kept growing forward and getting more and more modern. And actually, you yourself recorded with Max with his percussion ensemble Boom, right?
No, I didn't. I think I had a possible opportunity to record with him, but when the recording time came up, I was on tour, I think, with Brass Fantasy.
Okay, and that's a big can of worms. Lester is a big, great can of worms that we're going to open up in a minute. But
Okay.
okay, but first, I wanted to run this thing by you. One of the greatest lessons I've ever learned in music was from your friend Frank Gordon. So
Mhm.
I was new in New York, young kid, like 22, and starting to sub with Charlie Persip's band up at Boys Harbor at 104th and 5th.
Uh-huh.
And of course, thrilled to play with Charlie Persip. You know, your little mind is going, "Hey, play with Dizzy, and you play with Coltrane." Freddie Hubbard. You know what I mean? And Charlie Persip is the only person in the history of jazz who spelled Charlie with no E. You know?
Right. Yep.
And do you remember? This is not for nothing, but there was this enormous fellow who played in the trumpet section in Persip's band named Genghis Noor. Do you remember
Oh
this guy?
yeah. Oh
You know,
yeah.
that was an interesting band, but you know, like any other rehearsal band in New York, I think in other towns you do it for no money and you do it for the music. In New York, you do it for no money, the music and the connections.
Right.
Because I played in rehearsal bands in New York where I got to play with Ronnie Matthews, Wayne Andre, Benny Powell, Chip Jackson, Bob Milliken. I met all those guys in free rehearsal bands, which is what Persip's band basically was. I don't remember too many gigs.
Right.
But I remember my buddy Patience Higgins playing second alto next to me and certain people in the band. I don't remember the whole band, but I remember Frank Gordon because I immediately flashed on, he's how about that, Joe's Lewis. You know, so,
Right.
so I knew Frank was, you know, I knew him from Thad and Mel's band, and I noticed, much like yourself, Frank was not just a trumpet player in the band. Frank was contributing arrangements, but I think he had been with Charlie a long time, and this is an ongoing relationship. So we played a few of Frank's charts. I thought they were excellent. There might have been one called Saturn. I don't know, not
Right.
Saturn, Neptune. One of those planets. Maybe.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, I really liked it. And I think, I must have said something to Frank. I was no older than 22, 23. I said, you know, man, your charts are great, but I got to tell you, I noticed, and this is before Finale and Sibelius, that the penmanship is beautiful and the charts are really clear and clean and easy to read. And this is when Frank Gordon gave me like $1 million lesson. He said, you know what, man? And maybe he meant in New York or just in general. He said, if you bring in a chart to a big band of professionals, you know, jaded, experienced cats, he said, and your chart looks good and correct and professional, they'll immediately cop a good attitude toward it. And if it looks shitty and handwritten and sloppy and incorrect and backwards note heads and wrong clefs, he goes, they'll immediately cop a bad attitude. So what he said was, your charts need to look clean so that not only will the guys be able to play them, but they'll unconsciously respect your writing at the beginning of the process. I mean, however Frank put that to me, that really spoke to me.
Oh yeah. Well, now one of my teachers told me the same thing in Milwaukee before I came here.
Okay.
And I said, oh, okay. And I said, okay, but I kind of dismissed it.
Mm-hmm.
And once arriving in New York, Frank told me the exact same thing.
Did he?
And yeah, and that's when I was like, oh. So all of a sudden I heard my teacher's voice in the back of my head. It's like, oh, he knew what he was talking about. And now
because Frank reiterated the same lesson.
Exactly.
Great.
So, and Frank was like one of my teachers, once a teacher and friend when I first arrived here, because as I was telling people in Milwaukee that I was going to come to New York,
yes,
one of the things that the teachers at the conservatory would say, oh, when you get to New York, look up Frank Gordon.
Right.
Like,
gotcha.
Oh, okay.
Well, you know what? I want to circle around to another guy who you may have not played with a lot, but I know you worked with him, brother Jack McDuff, the great organist. So my very first gig in New York was with him. I had been in New York for about an hour, but I had called like 60 people and said, hey man, I'm moving to town. And, you know, I get to New York, I put down my suitcase, I get in the shower, I take a shower, I come out, my girlfriend says, there's a phone call for you. I go, hello, it's Rudy Petshower. I go, hey, can you work with Jack McDuff Saturday night? And I'm going, well, I'm glad I laid that groundwork, you know. So, but why did I bring him? Oh, okay, because now Rudy, I'm outing some shit here that people don't really know about. And of course, Rudy's still on the scene. Maybe he'll see this interview. But Rudy was very studious when he played drums with McDuff. And I used to stay at his pad because I was friends with his roommate, Joel Weiskopf. And Essiet and Mike Mossman lived upstairs. It was out in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. And it was part of my introduction to New York. And then Ned Gould lived in that apartment. And when he left, Joe Magnarelli took his room. And so it was a whole, that kind of thing. I mean, you know what I learned recently, man? Check this shit out. Supposedly, Booker Little was roommates for a minute with Sonny Rollins.
Wow.
That's something,
wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that's really deep, it's a whole other discussion. Another great musician you played with, one of my other favorites, Joe Henderson, supposedly was roommates with Junior Cook, which might explain a little bit why Joe sounds the way Joe sounds. Because Junior Cook didn't always sound the same, but when he had that really woody, reedy, dark, rich kind of tenor sound, it was very Joe-ish. And so, so when you hear the connection between later Junior Cook and Joe Henderson, and you think, well, the cats lived together. No wonder they damn sounded like each other,
Oh yeah. In fact, I heard the same thing, but I also heard that if you approach Junior and you make the mistake of saying, wow, you sound like Joe Henderson.
He said, no, he sounds like me, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, here's what Rudy would tape all the rehearsals because he was a very committed musician to trying to play the best time and grooves that he could with McDuff. Mm-hmm. So he played me a cassette way back in the day in that apartment in Brooklyn. And here's what was on. I mean, I shouldn't do this, but I can do it right, so I'm going to do it. I used to be with George Russell, and it's a slippery slope as far as some of the racial discussions. But George used to say to me, "Yeah, man, do some Brother Jack." So I would imitate Jack McDuff for George Russell, and he would like fall over laughing. And I learned it not so much from the one gig I did with McDuff, but I learned it from Rudy's tape. You learn a bird solo from a record. So I'm gonna tell you what I heard. McDuff rehearsal, guitar player, supposedly from Wisconsin. I'll tell you later, but he's not quite making it. And he's like, let me get it right. It's not having, man. What does he say? He says, man, that ain't it. And he says something like, man, there's a motherfucker in my hometown carrying mail who can play them chords. So that's the one thing. And then the guitar player makes the mistake of, and he's unnamed on the tape. And he says, well, gee, Mr. McDuff, could we, maybe, come back to it and play something else? And McDuff goes, man, this is my motherfucking band. You want to play what you want to play? Go get your own motherfucking band. But in my band, you're going to play what I want to play. And this is my favorite line. And then McDuff goes, and if you can't play it, it's going to be played by some fucking body.
There you go. There you go.
I love that. Some fucking body. But long story short, I don't want to belabor this because there's a lot of your beautiful career that I want to get to today. But McDuff, at the end of this, in his frustration with the guitarist not being able to play what he wants, this is the speech. Man, I writes the music. I teaches it to you. I book the job. I drives you to the job. I pays you for what? I don't fucking know. Man, I do damn near everything but suck your dick, and y'all still can't play the motherfucking music. So, my imitation may not be great, but that's what I heard McDuff say. Oh, but the reason I even brought up McDuff was because in the middle of these diatribes, he says this hilarious but very prescient, smart thing. If you think about it, like when Buddy Rich is screaming at the band, and then you think about it later when it's less emotional, and you go, well, he was kind of right, or that's pretty funny, or So McDuff says, man, everybody say New York is where all the heavy cats at. I say New York is where all the sad motherfuckers come and bunch together and give each other gigs. Now, all he's talking about is guys from Milwaukee are working together. Guys from LA are working together. Guys from New Jersey are working together. Like coming to New York, but kind of like sticking with it's like being Italian and moving to the Italian neighborhood when you come to America, something like that, Right. And I thought it was very interesting, but there are good aspects, of course. I mean, so long story short, you coming to New York and looking up Frank Gordon was a great move because that's Milwaukee leading to New York for you, right?
Oh, yeah. And it was that, like I said, the Milwaukee connection. And just and also remember that my teachers in Milwaukee told me to look him up.
Okay.
So my teachers are giving me instructions, directions. So, I'm not going to be disrespectful, because I know when I go back to visit, if they keeping in touch with Frank and they say, "Oh, did Eddie Allen ever call you?" And he says, "No," the next time I go back, I'm going to hear, "So I heard you didn't look up Frank." It's like, oh crap. So
So in
they
other words,
told me.
they want you to take that opportunity,
Exactly.
and you did.
Oh yeah. And so when I met Frank, um, he had his own way of sizing me up before I knew he was sizing me up.
Mm,
So when I came, he was doing the Lena Horne show.
okay.
So he invited me to come and check out the show from backstage. And I'm like, okay, I'm just getting to New York and I get to sit backstage of a Broadway show with Lena Horne.
Beautiful.
Okay. So I'm sitting off stage like amazing. I remember, I believe it was him and Cecil Bridgewater were in the trumpet section. I forgot who else was there, but that was just impressive. And then he mentioned, well, what are you doing? Blah, 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 whatever day. I was like, nothing. He said, okay, well, come by the rehearsal. So he took me to Charlie Purse's rehearsal.
Right.
And he said, yeah, well, no, you don't have to play. Just sit next to me and check out the music. I said, okay. And I was just happy to be on the New York scene. Like you said, Charlie Purse, I knew he was in Dizzy Gillespie's big band. So I'm sitting looking at the music of the band leader who played with Dizzy Gillespie. Like, holy crap. So I'm watching watching everything going on. And eventually Charlie asked, or not Charlie, but Frank had asked me if I could read that music. So I said yes. And then the next chart that came up, he had me read. And he said, okay, you're a pretty good reader. I said, thank you. So, like I said, he was doing Lena Horne's show. And what I found out later was he was checking out to see if I could read well. And since I did, he went to Charlie and asked Charlie if I could play in his place, because they were they were going to be playing at the Jazz Forum every Wednesday, and Frank wouldn't be able to make it until the second set. So Charlie said, okay. So I started playing in Charlie's band as a sub for Frank, playing the first set, and then Frank came in and did the second set.
Well, but you know what? Of course, as we know, moving to New York and getting to sub one set with Charlie Persip is like, the most exciting thing in the world. You're with the cats. You're really doing it.
Exactly. And just like you said, being in that big band, seeing all these other heavyweights. And I think, in fact, the first rehearsal I did, Bobby Watson was actually playing lead alto.
Okay, I forgot that. I mean, I'm a little younger than Bobby. I was never around when Bobby was with Persip, but I guess he was there way back in the day. Yeah.
Right, and he might have just been subbing, but when I was subbing, because I didn't know who was subbing and who were regulars.
Sure.
I just remember, he was there. Craig Harris was in the trombone section. Steve Furtado, who had actually played with Thad and Mel, Steve was playing lead in the band.
Okay.
So I'm getting a chance to look around and see all these heavyweights, and also just before I moved to New York, Charlie had put out a new album of his band, Super Band. But the album that came out at that time, it was actually a co-led band.
Jerry LaFern.
Exactly. And so they did a record on Stash Records.
Okay.
And no, I was still in Milwaukee, but I bought that record. And when I moved to New York and I get a chance to play in the band, most of the guys on the recording are in the band.
Sure.
So like I said, I'm just happy to be there. I don't need the solo. I just want to play parts and just try to fit in and not screw up.
Well, obviously you did it. So, I don't want to fast forward because these are great stories, but I want to cover a lot of the cats that you played with. Okay. So obviously this was your, like, an open door into the jazz scene in New York, through
Mhm.
Frank Gordon and Charlie Persip. So that's a great start. I don't know the chronology of when you played with some of these other cats, but can I just reel off some names? And there's so much we want to do today. Maybe you could give a 1 or 2 sentence reaction to what you remember or what you did with them. Maybe
Okay.
about 10 folks, and then we can start talking about Lester. How's that?
Okay.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to hit you with a name of someone you worked with. Give us whatever you want to give us.
Okay.
Benny Carter.
Played in his big band. He did a couple performances with his big band. Great, beautiful person, incredible writer, nice guy.
Did he ever play any trumpet or violin anymore, or just alto?
I think when I first saw him in New York, he was still kind of bouncing back and forth between alto and trumpet,
Mhm.
and that was when I saw him with a small group at, I think it was at Sweet Basil.
Mhm. I did see Benny at the Regatta Bar in Boston myself, because frankly, he was over 90 years old. I told myself, man, you better see this cat while you can, is the nicest
Yeah,
way to put it.
exactly.
Well, speaking of another great that we lost recently, and I have really big hands. Actually, I think my video is lost. I don't think you can see me anymore. I'm not sure why,
Right. Yeah, I
but
can't see you.
it doesn't matter. But anyway, I have really big hands, and one person I know has much bigger hands than me, Randy Weston.
Oh,
Nobody is. I
that,
mean, the cat is like 6'7". He had the biggest hands, could do amazing things on the piano. But of
mhm.
course, he was always directly interested in, okay, I'm going to use all my $50 words, interpolating an African diaspora into his jazz music.
True. I like that.
Okay, well, you can have it. We share. But so what did you do with Randy, and was it more straight ahead or more African influenced music at that time?
Well, I think with Randy, to me and my ear, it was always all mixed together.
Hmm.
And one of the first performances I did with him was with a big band in Switzerland,
Okay.
and it was me, Wallace Roney, and Benny Bailey was the lead trumpeter.
I love Benny Bailey. I say that
Ah,
unabashedly, man. Oh my God.
incredible. And so I did that with him. Years later, I played. It would always be like almost like a special event. So we did a festival. I think it might have been the Winter Festival or Visions Festival.
Hmm.
And he had an
In New
extended
York.
band there. Yeah, here in New York. And just the nicest guy, as big as he is, as big as his hands is, just the nicest guy.
Beautiful. Now I have it on authority. You can correct me if I'm wrong. You actually did work with Dizzy Gillespie, yeah?
Uh, uh, yes. Well, yes, but through, I'm not sure if it was the only time, but it was through Charlie Purs's big band.
Okay.
Charlie did a concert, and he decided he wanted Dizzy to be the special guest. And Dizzy came in, and it was just incredible. And just like a kid, when Dizzy came to play with us, I had to be or not to bop. So I brought my book, and he signed it for me.
Sure. Well, do you know Joe Cohn, the great guitar player, Al Cohn's son?
Uh-huh.
And you know how he's a maniac. He's like an Art Tatum of the guitar. But Joe also plays trumpet. One time I was
Hmm.
at his house in Massachusetts, and he let me play Al Cohn's tenors, which is really heavy. You know what I mean? Playing,
Whoa.
that guy's horns is like ghosts. But
Right.
anyway, he said to me, okay, I'll practice tenor for 7 years and you practice guitar for 7 years, and we'll see who's better. Ready, go. you know but but the thing that made me laugh was there was a situation in Boston where Freddie Hubbard needed a sub, and he couldn't get the saxophonist he was currently using, who I believe were Bill Pierce and or Kenny Garrett. So he ended up getting Joe Cohn on guitar as a fifth band member. And Joe told me he
Oh.
spent the whole night bugging Freddie about what to practice on the trumpet. Which if you're playing guitar with Freddie Hubbard is pretty funny. That you don't even care about that. You just want to talk about the trumpet.
Right.
But then again, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, Joe's a brilliant guy. Anybody who plays trumpet who was around Freddie would want to ask about the trumpet, I suppose.
Right.
Because
Right.
this is my personal belief. that Freddie played his living ass off his entire career, but nothing in this life tops 1965 Freddie Hubbard. You know, right around there, Maiden Voyage, Andrew Hill, Compulsion. I mean, I just hear Freddie playing, you know, the later stuff with Blakey, with Wayne and Curtis. Freddie on fire at that age. There's almost no trumpet playing finer, is there?
Oh yeah. Well, and also Freddie had said many times that probably like during that period and even before, that he used to bounce back and forth between practicing with Train and practicing with Sonny Rollins.
Now that's interesting. I knew he practiced with Train. I never heard about Freddie shedding with Sonny. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Oh yeah, and he even said that he felt like one of the reasons that he was able to do it was because you know, he would practice with Train for a while, and Train would ask him what Sonny working on.
Oh, of course they were asking each other, but probably Train was just sort of like this, and Sonny was like, you know, trying to find out, you know.
Oh yes, but I'm sure they were both curious about what the other one was doing and working on, and then it kind of like explained from a trumpet standpoint because Freddie's lines were different than most trumpet players.
They were.
So,
in other words, in terms of using the technique of the trumpet, was Freddie playing things that weren't so usual or comfortable?
Exactly.
Okay.
You know, before Freddie, you know, trumpet players played you know, intervals of seconds and thirds and, you know, maybe fourths and fifths, but not as frequent. But
right.
Freddie did it a lot. I mean, you look at that yeah, so those are like fourths and fifths all over the place.
Excuse me. And that's some shit where for other trumpet players, they were hearing Freddie and going, damn, the head. It wasn't even the solo yet. And actually, you singing hub tones, I just made a connection I've never made my whole life. That is similar to Woody Shaw's Stepping Stones later.
Oh yeah, exactly. But even before that, Freddie did that on with Thermo with the Messengers.
Uh-huh. You know, actually, that's, you know, you shouldn't have any pet quotes. Quotes should only happen organically, right? When you're soloing, I think. You know, well, if they're premeditated, they're not cool. That's my own aesthetic about it. You know, like don't plan. If they come out in the flow of your solo, that's fine.
Well, that to a certain extent, but it's still something that has to be worked on. Well, I mean, you know, you listen to sometimes you listen to Freddie play, especially during that period, and you would hear him quoting Oliver Nelson's "Hold Down."
Oh yeah,
okay. He stuck that in his.
Oh, that's right. That's part of the written. Maybe that's the bridge of "Hold Down," right?
Right, exactly.
So basically, that tune, if I remember vaguely, is like corny rhythm changes A section and then hipper than shit bridge that you just sang. That
exactly. Right. And so in Freddie's solos with different people, you know, during that period, you would hear him quoting "Hold Down." So to me, if you in one of the things that I remember people used to say, musicians would say, music is a universal language. And I used to think that was such a hip phrase, but I didn't know what it meant. But then as I got older and started trying to dissect and really understand it, it's like, well, if music is a language, it's like with any language, you have to learn these not only the alphabets, but these different words.
Sure.
So, you know, basically we learn yes, no, maybe, the cat, the dog, the tiger, I'm going to take a walk. All these different words we learn is like, okay, but now how do you construct a sentence? So we still end up using these words that are in the language. So if they're, I don't know if you could say it's premeditated, but it's a part of the language. Okay. And we don't dwell on trying to be super original when we speak English.
True.
So the same is, if you look at music as a language, the same can be said with that. It's like, okay, I'm not going to try to speak exactly like John F. Kennedy and mirror every speech he said. It's like, but if it just so happens that we both use similar words in order to talk about the same movie, it's like, that's a part of the English language. And it's the
Okay.
same for the music languages. Like if we're studying jazz or we're studying music, we study European classical music, and then you listen to, so you play jazz, you listen to European classical music, and then you check out Burt Bacharach and Aretha Franklin.
Right.
Now, if you're playing a jazz, and people will say this about Bird, and Miles did this as well, that sometimes in the middle of a solo, they would quote some European classical piece.
Sure.
So you don't know how premeditated it is, but in that moment, they felt like putting it in there. So it's like, I don't know if it's premeditated, but it's kind of cute. And if they meant it as a joke, it's like, okay, I see the humor in it.
Well, that's a whole other thing. But speaking of humor, we got to get to Lester, but I'm going to read a quick list of other luminaries you played with, and if you don't mind, at the end of the list, whatever pops into your head about any of these folks would be great.
Okay.
Some folks that Eddie Allen worked with: John Faddis, Joe Henderson, Lewis Hayes. I'm trying to get people we haven't mentioned yet: Chico Freeman, Moo Hall. Great Moo Hall, Richard Abrams. At Banff, we used to call him Pool Hall because he was always playing pool. When we were between classes, Pool Hall, Richard Abrams. I loved him. He was something.
Yeah.
Etta Jones, and then I found out a tiny little sliver of information, very interesting. Older cats that you work with now, Houston Person, which we can hear in a second. Great tenor player, soulful, big fat, old school sound. Still working at about 84, 85 years old. But I didn't know that you recorded with Teddy Edwards, man. Wow.
Oh, yeah. And that was through Houston.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't we just hear you in Houston right now to put us in that headspace, and then we'll get right to Lester, because as soon as you say humor and music, you can almost start laughing in your own head thinking about how goddamn funny Lester Bowie was.
I agree.
Because actually the only time I got to hang with him was in Japan. I'm not bragging. It's a great story, though. I'm over there for the first time with Teru Masahino, and I'm eating sushi next to Don Moye, and next to him is Lester Bowie. And I said something like, this is a great gig, but I don't have much when I get back to New York, and I'm worried about, not working. And my uncle always said, don't play music by a truck. And Lester puts down his, chopsticks or whatever, and he goes, you should buy a truck. We have a truck. So that's the other can of worms. So dig this. Let's hear a young Eddie Allen playing trumpet with the great tenor saxophonist Houston Person, another favorite of mine. And this is an old standard called I'm a Lucky So-and-So. Let's hear a taste of this. I see you smiling. You're getting ready. It's coming up. Beautiful. We're back. So Houston Person on tenor saxophone and Eddie Allen on trumpet. And Eddie, can you speak briefly to what your approach is when you play with an older school tenor player like Houston or Teddy Edwards or somebody like Benny Carter? I mean, you can't really play like Woody Shaw with those guys and necessarily make it stylistically correct. So what kind of adjustments do you make when you're trying to support them and play in the style with them?
It's exactly what you're saying. Just remember, for me, my basic concept is just remember your place. Like
Mhm.
I go through the door as a side man, so I follow the leader.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Well, and speaking of that, there are three incredible leaders that you've worked with, and we want to make sure we get to talk about all of them today while we have a little bit of time. Let's talk about Lester Bowie, the great
Okay.
trumpet player, great comedian, more often performing in a lab coat than not, and one of the founders of the Art Ensemble of Chicago, a very, very important group in so many ways. And I believe that you made 4 CDs with Lester Bowie's Brass Fantasy, 3 with the group, and a 4th one where the Brass Fantasy meets the Art Ensemble. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And I think you're on the CD Serious Fun. Is that the one from Japan? I'm trying to remember. Is that the one
Uh,
where Frank Lacey sings Papa's Got a Brand New Bag?
yes, I believe so.
I love that. And at the end of it, it was very topical at the moment because James Brown was imprisoned. And at the end of that track, Frank Lacey yells, "Free James Brown!"
Right, exactly.
So, and I bought that record in Japan because I never saw it in America. And I'm like, man, I better grab this while I can.
Oh, okay. And it
Well,
was actually it was recorded here in the States and it was released here.
right.
Like you said, it might have been tricky to find, but it was released here. And the one we did with the art ensemble, that was actually recorded live at a jazz festival in Japan.
I see. Well, so Lester, let's talk about Brass Fantasy. This was an
Mm.
incredible band. My recollection is it was usually 4 trumpets, different people, Matt Gallahan playing lead. You were there, Gerald Brazil. Usually, I believe Vincent Chansey on French horn, and almost always Steve Turre and Frank Lacey on trombone, Bob Stewart on tuba, and the late great Philip Wilson sometimes on drums, or Vinnie Johnson from Boston on drums. Does most of that sound right?
Right, except Matt Goulihan came at the very end of my stay. At
Okay.
the very beginning, it was Stanton Davis on lead trumpet.
Oh, okay. And I got to work with Stanton. His tail end of working with George Russell was my beginning with George. So I got to
Hmm.
work with Stanton a little bit, and then they brought in a lead player from Boston when Stanton left.
Oh, okay.
Right. And I
Right.
always remember he had like kind of a funky fusion record that he made in the 70s. And it was Funky Fried Tofu. That's how he said it. Cam
Oh,
Davis,
okay.
Funky Fried Tofu. You could look that one up.
Not in fact, I believe now because Stanton brought me into Brass Fantasy, and I think Funky Fried Tofu. I think I did an arrangement of that tune for Brass Fantasy. I can't remember if we recorded it or not, but I
Okay.
believe I did one.
Well, speaking of Brass Fantasy, let's hear some of your writing with that band right now. Let's hear a taste of this is a piece that you wrote for the group called Journey Towards Freedom. So let's
Yes.
jump right into that.
Okay.
Lester Bowie's Brass Fantasy, composition by Eddie Allen, Journey Towards Freedom. I'm sure we'll get there in a second. Yeah, sorry to jump out of that because we just wanted to get a taste. I know that's that new groove with Bob Stewart on tuba. But so I realize, Eddie, there are three people I really want to talk to you about in the limited time that we have left. And so those folks are, because they're all incredible leaders, incredible spirits in the music, Lester Bowie, and then let's talk about Art Blakey and Billy Harper and try to fit that in before we go. Okay.
Okay.
So Lester, my limited experience getting to meet him and hearing him play, this was a very unique musician, a creamy, buttery sound, all kinds of weird, great effects, half valves, and really like talking and crying on the trumpet, and a real type A personality, the person you could definitely give the microphone to at a wedding and he could do all the toasts.
Hmm.
You know,
Right.
leave it to Lester. I mean, a born leader, would you say?
Yes, definitely.
What would you like to say about Lester Bowie and that particularly great band, Brass Fantasy? The one thing I would say is I can see Lester's love for doo-wop and for pop music because he recorded "Oh What a Night" by the Dells. He recorded "Papa's Got a Brand New Bag," James Brown, and let me see, "Saving All My Love for You," Whitney Houston. Arrangements of these pieces for what people put you in a box, but they would have if they put Lester at a festival in Europe. Oh well, he's on the avant-garde cats, but there he is, and it's doo-wop. And so Lester kind of runs the gamut from kind of early rock and roll and soul to free jazz and everything in between. So the labels aren't important, but I feel like he's a more wide-ranging musician than a lot of cats. Everything was fair game. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. And I mentioned before that he kind of inspired me. Between him and Frank Gordon, they inspired me to have as many groups as I wanted if I'm writing in all these different styles. And with all the music that Lester would have coming in with Brass Fantasy,
Mhm.
the majority of the time he would make the suggestion on which tunes he wanted.
Okay.
So he knew for Brass Fantasy, he knew which songs he wanted. Like even he would come to me with specific tunes that he wanted me to bring in. He
Uh-huh.
would go to Earl McIntyre if he wanted a specific thing.
And,
So
and Cliff
so
DeRay wrote for the band too, and maybe
right,
Frank Lacey, other folks.
exactly.
Right.
But so it wasn't like he didn't have a vision. He definitely had a vision, and the music that he did was with Brass Fantasy was completely different than the Art Ensemble,
Right.
completely different than he had a group called the Organ Ensemble.
Right.
He worked with the leaders, but each group he worked with, each group he had a completely different book.
Yeah, did you ever hear him? Do you remember there was a Jack DeJohnette New Directions that included my buddy John Abercrombie on guitar,
Hmm.
Mike Richmond on bass, and Lester on trumpet? And that's a
Oh,
really disparate, stylistically, that's a really wide thing, between Lester and Abercrombie and everything. But
right.
John basically expressed to me there were certain things that Lester did particularly well, and those were the things that they focused on, and that it was a great contrast in that band between Abercrombie and Lester in the front line, kind of, you know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could see that. I'm not familiar with that album, but yeah, that would definitely make sense.
Sure. And we did a two-part interview recently with Joe Bowie, the leader of the greatest funk band that ever existed, Defunct. And
Uh-huh.
Joe was on here with us from the Netherlands a few weeks ago. And I almost have to wonder if some of the influence into Joe even starting Defunct in 1981 came from older brother Lester and a love for funk and R&B along with jazz and freer things.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't either because Bowies are tight and there are a lot of them and they all play great, right?
True. Yeah.
Well, okay, on to Art Blakey, if we may. So I know you weren't there. You were there for what we might call, in retrospect, a hot minute. But
Right.
but essentially, Wallace Roney recommended you to replace him. Is that what happened?
No, Wallace recommended me to play with Billy Harper,
Ah,
and
okay,
I replaced him because he was going with Chico Freeman.
right, okay,
And so and Billy had a 6-week tour of South America coming up, and Chico had probably a 6 or 8 week tour of Europe,
hmm,
but Chico was working a lot back then. So Wallace asked me to do Billy's job, and I loved it. and we went to South America for 6 weeks. And when I came back from there,
Hmm.
I went back to play with Charlie Persip's big band, and Jimmy Cozier recommended me for Mongo.
Okay.
And so the music director, who was Sam Furness, he came
Oh, I
to the
remember Sam Furness. He died
see.
real early. He played baritone and alto,
Right, exactly.
and he played with the Blakey Big Band in Japan, and he also was part of Abdullah's band with Ikaya, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And so Sam came, introduced himself, asked me if I wanted to play with Mongo. I said, sure.
Beautiful.
And so then I joined Mongo. So I was with Mongo and Billy at the same time.
Nice.
And then maybe 1 or 2 years later, Craig Harris asked me to join his group. And I started playing with Craig as well. And I met Craig through playing with Charlie Purs's big band.
Okay, so let me pause for a second. Was Craig's band the James Brown tribute band Cold Sweat?
No, that actually came later. His first band that I played in was called Tailgaters Tales.
Oh, I remember that band. And Craig Harris, for people who don't know, Herschel, you'll love this. Herschel, like most folks in Kansas City, is a rabid Kansas City Chiefs fan. And I heard that Craig Harris basically was drafted by the Chiefs, but chose jazz trombone instead. Does that sound accurate?
Oh. See, now I have no information about his sports background, so
But you do remember him being an extremely muscular dude.
he was in shape. I know the one thing that we did talk about was he told me that he used to play a high alive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he played. He's from Long Island, so he played on the teams there.
Oh, okay, crazy.
Yeah.
Well, so the highlight that I know is Milford, Connecticut, and that's across from Long Island. And I grew up on Long Island too. I didn't
Oh,
know there was
okay.
a highlight out there. But so long story short, you stayed with Billy Harper a long time, 1983, and we established till roughly 90 or 91.
Right.
And that's such a great book because I know from working with Francesca, we talk about it. Billy has tunes that he wrote 35 years ago that are still a fresh daily part of that book. So
Oh, yeah.
Billy has accrued a book of nothing but his own compositions over a long period of time. And occasionally he'll redo a standard like My Funny Valentine, or he'll sing My One and Only Love. Well, Rob, I don't do that anymore. I just sang for a while, Rob. But
That's
so playing the Billy Harper book, how can I put it? It's got Billy's stamp on it. It's got it's got a real spiritual bent, and it's got a big kind of sonic debt to the music of John Coltrane, I would say.
And well, but my first introduction to his music was through Lee Morgan. Remember
Oh,
he
because he
did
was maybe the last tenor player with Lee, even after Benny Maupin.
right, and Lee recorded Capra Black and Croquet Ballet.
Yes, and Croquet Ballet, I have to say, of all the funky Lee Morgan solos ever recorded, that's the
Mhm.
very funkiest one.
Oh
That's
yeah, and I stole a lot from that solo.
yeah, buddy up, buddy up, buddy up, buddy up. That little diminished lick. There's all kinds of shit to steal from Lee there, right?
Right, exactly.
Right.
So for me to get the chance to play with the tenor player who played with Lee Morgan, I was a huge Lee Morgan fan.
Who
I
is it?
used to, I used to try to bend his notes, but I would try because he bended the notes a lot then. So I would try to bend them even more so people couldn't tell that I was stealing from him.
Can I ask you a question? Are we talking
Sure.
for non-trumpet players like myself? Was that all half valve effects, or was it other stuff too?
Half valve and adjusting the lip so the note could bend even more.
No kidding. So
Yeah.
you think that Lee was a stylistic innovator with certain bending things that he did?
Uh, I wouldn't say that, but it became part of his signature.
Sure.
Because those same kind of bent notes you would hear big bands doing that from the 20s and 30s when they would call it a gliss, but
Right.
Lee made it a part of his solo repertoire.
I see.
And
Well, so in other words, playing with Billy, as soon as you got in that mix, you were excited because of his connection to Lee.
no, I was excited because of Billy Harper.
Yes, well, a lot to be
Lee
excited
connection
about.
was Lee Morgan connection was the bonus.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, and just before we wrap up, I just want to say let's do this. Let's give us a quick memory or platitude about Billy, and we'll talk about Art Blakey, and we're going to have to call it a day. And I'm so sorry because there's so much to talk about.
Not a problem.
So all that time with Billy Harper, I mean, it's a great gig for a trumpet player. When I've seen other friends of mine like Freddie Hendrix, who does it now, or Eddie Henderson back in the day, it's a custom made gig for a trumpet player to really wail and play on some great material and great frontline tenor and trumpet writing with Billy, where occasionally, like on Illumination, he writes the trumpet way down low and the tenor is playing lead, right?
Right. Yes.
So that's another aspect. You know, when you play trumpet, you're not used to playing second in a quintet, right?
Well, once again, like I said, for me, I'm not walking through the door thinking I'm supposed to play the melody all the time. If I'm the side man, I'm walking through the door trying to think of how am I going to fit in.
I understand. I guess I'm just
Mhm.
saying, I think it's unusual that Billy will write that way with a high tenor and a low trumpet. I don't hear a lot of folks do that. Although I noticed real quickly with Art Blakey, I realized there were a couple of tunes, I couldn't believe it, where Freddie Hubbard was playing on top, Curtis was playing the second part, and Wayne Shorter was playing the lowest part. And I would have
Mhm.
assumed as an arranger that the tenor would have been above the trombone, but not always the case.
Right, but but it's like if you walk through the door without any preconceived notions, just
Yes,
going through the door to do the best you can to present whatever music is placed in front of you,
yes.
then all that should go out the window.
So
It's
in other
like
words,
so.
you come there as an open vessel, and if they say you're playing third and you're below the, you're below the piccolo or you're above the trombone or whatever. In other words, doesn't matter what it is, you're open. That's
Right,
that.
and to me, it doesn't matter whether or not I'm above or below another instrument. The
Sure,
goal is always to blend.
of course. And you might be given a role that you're not used to, and then you make the best of it, and you're musical. That's all you can do, right?
But even if you go through the door without that preconceived notion, then you're not given a role that you're not used to because that wasn't in your head in the first place.
I understand. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
So Eddie, two quick things, and we'll be done. Herschel, I promise. Number one, there have been many records and concerts where you have been referred to as EJ Allen versus Eddie Allen, or Eddie quote EJ unquote Allen. Can you shed some light on that for us, and why you more recently have pretty much dropped EJ and prefer to be referred to as Eddie Allen?
Right. Well, I had to make it for me personally, I kind of felt like I needed to decide which way I was going to go professionally. And I ended up deciding to just stick with Eddie. Some of my friends still call me EJ, and I have no problem with that. But professionally on stage is Eddie, because I started to realize that I was competing with myself for jobs without realizing it. And the one story that I was going to mention to you before was when Wallace asked me if I could do Billy Harper, if I wanted to do Billy Harper's job, I said, sure. So Wallace gave me Billy Harper's number. I believe he gave Billy's my information. I contacted Billy. Billy had me come over. I went through the music. He said, oh, you sound great. You got the gig. I said, okay. So I go back, and Wallace and I used to hang out quite a bit, like when I first got to New York. And Wallace would ask me, so how did the rehearsal go? I said, well, I think it went well. He said he was happy with it. He said I got the tour, and this was 6 weeks in South America. And Wallace was like, okay. So then, the couple of days would go by, I'm hanging out with Wallace again. And then I'd ask Wallace, I said, well, what's going on? Is everything cool? And Wallace's response was, Billy's talking about using somebody else who I'd never heard of. So I don't know what's going on. And now I'm puzzled because Billy had already offered me the job. So I'm like, but if Billy's telling Wallace something else, then maybe it's not going to happen. So Wallace's last job with Billy was at Sweet Basil. So Wallace invited me down to meet Billy. So because Wallace was still trying to push me for the job.
Yes.
And Billy invited me down to see Wallace's last performance and to see how the band sounded as a group. And I'm like, love to. And at the same time, I'm thinking, well, maybe we can clear this up because I don't know what's going on now.
Right.
So that I get there, they play a set, they sound incredible. They finish the set, and it's like a comedy routine. So Billy and I'm sitting at the bar. Billy and Wallace walks off stage and they start coming towards the bar. And I get up to kind of like say hello and tell them how great they sound. And I'm walking towards them, they're walking towards me. And Wallace looks at Billy with this puzzled expression on his face after I get close enough. And Wallace says, "This is EJ." And Billy looks at Wallace and says, "This is Eddie." and, and so they kind of like both throw their hands up, and that's when they realize, oh, we've been talking about the same guy, not realizing, because it never crossed my mind that when I introduced myself to Wallace that I only said EJ. It
Right.
never crossed my mind when I introduced myself to Billy that I said Eddie. And so it never crossed my mind that they didn't know I was the same person.
I get it. So you had to make Clark Kent and Superman the same cat so you wouldn't lose your own gigs.
Exactly. And then it got to the point where if you look at some of the things I did with Brass Fantasy, you see Eddie EJ Allen on one CD, you see EJ Eddie Allen on another CD, you
Right.
see Eddie Allen EJ on another.
So
and
you
I said,
eventually you just had to clear this shit up for everybody.
exactly.
Okay.
And,
Well, speaking of clearing things up, I mean, our producer has 4 little kids, so I'm going to give him a break. Tell us about your short stint with Art Blakey, and we'll call it a day. And our closing music will be something from your new CD that we want to hear.
oh, great. Well, my stint with Art Blakey was a joy. He would. I was with the Little Big Band,
Right.
as they were making the transition. So the trumpet section was it was me and Brian Lynch on trumpet. Sam Furness was on baritone, and we did a job at Sweet Basil, and Vincent Herring played alto.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask, was it Bobby Watson and Billy Pierce, or not quite the same era?
Say no, this was in 1990.
Okay.
And the band with Bobby and Bill was in the late 70s.
Okay.
And so like I said, Art was just like every other great leader. He would let you know in his own way, and it was almost like an inside joke. He would let you know something that only the band might catch more so than the audience. If you played something that didn't work, he might look at you. He might play the drums a little louder. He might lay out. Now on the same tip, he might do all that stuff if he likes what you did, but it's just a matter of you kind of like reading the signals and figuring out, okay, I shouldn't do that again.
So you're saying, I mean, as famous as Art is for saying pithy, funny things that really teach us a lot, you're saying he would do this with the drums a lot on the gig, kind of let you know what was happening, what he did,
yeah.
what didn't.
Oh yeah, and like I said, working with Mongo Santa Maria, Mongo would do the same thing. Sometimes he would look at us, he would let us know whether or not we played the wrong clave on a certain section, and other times he would look and smile, let us know, okay, you just did good.
So can you just clarify for us chronologically, where were you in Art's band between trumpet players? Who was before you and who was after?
Ooh, I'm not sure, but I think Philip Harper might have been before us.
Okay.
And then it was me and Brian were together. And then when they shrunk the band, Brian stayed till the end.
I remember that band at the end. Was it Brian Essiott, Jeff Keezer, maybe Frank Lacey, Javon, right, something like that?
Right. And all those guys were part of the big band as well. And right, I think there was a guy named Dale, who also played tenor.
Dale Barlow from Australia playing tenor.
Right. And I think he came after, oh man, I see his face in my head now. I can't even think of his name. That's embarrassing. But there's he actually was in Altman's movie about Kansas City.
Oh, sure.
Uh,
Craig Handy.
there you go. Exactly. So Craig was there for a quick second also.
Right. That's right. I remember. Well, so Eddie, there's so much to talk about, but what I'm going to just leave everybody with is we don't want to forget to mention that you sometimes have your own big band, Eddie Allen Aggregation,
Yes.
which I don't even know if we have a minute to hear, but you have all these great bands of your own. Tell us briefly, how are you faring during the pandemic? Are you recording? Is there anything happening, or is it just kind of a downtime?
Let's see. Well, I did a stream that's scheduled to air June 21st
Hmm.
on Facebook with my group called Push. But prior to that, with the pandemic, everything shut down. So music is mine, like most musicians, salvation. So I did a lot of shedding, a lot of practice, and I did a lot of writing and arranging.
Hmm.
So during the whole pandemic period, I was writing for all these different groups that I have, and we're all looking forward to the blinders, the shields being lifted, so we can get out there and do some playing again.
Right. So you didn't let depression seep in with the complete lack of work. You just sort of went to work on your horn and on your writing.
Exactly, because and that was one of the things. One of my teachers in Milwaukee, one of his lessons, he said, when there is no work, shed harder. And I said, "What? Okay, that doesn't really make sense. But why are you saying that?" He said, "Because when you get a call for a job, nobody wants to hear a reason why you suck."
Huh.
And I
Or,
said,
or why
"Wow."
you're rusty or not ready at that moment. Right.
Exactly, because unless you're ready to give the audience a discount, a refund, it's like
Ha.
they're not paying to hear why you don't sound good. They're paying to hear some music.
So you would say part of your personal credo is always be ready.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And I think with the trumpet and with charts, it seems like you always are, Eddie. And I think you're one of the great trumpet players in jazz. And I'm really thrilled to be talking to you today and to have your story now on tape that we can put in these archives forever.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's more than my pleasure. And I hope at some point we get back to New York and play together. I would love that.
Definitely. Same here.
Wonderful. Well, so what we're going to end with is a piece from your new CD. It's called Push. Really briefly, Kenny Davis on bass, EJ Strickland, the other EJ on drums, who actually is a twin with Marcus. So that's another great family of jazz musicians.
Yes.
Keith Loftus on tenor, Dion Tucker on trombone. I don't know who I'm leaving out.
Let's see. Misha Siganoff on keyboards, and Mark Suskin on piano, and I think you said Dion Tucker on trombone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it.
So a little of Eddie's more recent music that we're going to hear. Very briefly, on May 25th, we're going to do a double header. Pete Levin followed immediately by Jason Jackson. And then in June, we get into Ben Porowski, Rachel Z, James Zoller, and others. And so I want to thank our producer in Kansas City, Herschel McWilliams, for Live Jazz KC. And Eddie, I want to thank you so much for sharing your life and your tales and stories. And even more so than many musicians, really a plethora of very useful insights.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. I've learned a lot. I think it's good to stay open, and I've learned a lot from you today, and I want to thank you for that, man, for the inadvertent lesson.
You're welcome. You're very welcome.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, I'm Rob Scheps for Convo Improvvo. This has been Eddie, formerly EJ, presently Eddie Allen. And so check his music out. You've heard a lot of it, and we're going to close with Push from his new CD, which is that eponymous, or does the title different for the CD?
Eponymous. That's a good one. I don't know what that means.
It just means, I think, when the tune is the same title as the CD title.
Oh, okay. Then there you go.
So is it?
Yes.
Okay. So this will be, what would you say? Eddie Allen Sextet?
Oh no, it's Eddie Allen's Push, and Eddie Allen, and the tune is Push. Self-titled.
Push is the name of the band.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're going to close with that. Eddie Allen's Push. Everybody, thank you so much. Eddie Allen, thank you for everything. Very much appreciated.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, so let's hear that.